Do you find insurance confusing? Well, first of all, you're not alone. Second, you've come to the right place. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the basics of auto insurance and the types of coverages that you can purchase, as well as some considerations for how much coverage you actually need. So let's get started. Hi guys, I'm Chelsea Adler and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm an actuary and I've been working in the insurance industry for over 10 years. And on top of that, my dad is an insurance agent. Because of that, I have seen firsthand how amazing insurance can be. And I'm so passionate about demystifying insurance and making it easier for others to understand so they can love it just as much as I do. But before we get started, I have to add this disclaimer that I am not a licensed insurance agent. So nothing I share today can be construed as financial advice. And I think you'll see that a common theme is that everybody's situation is unique. So everyone's need for insurance is going to be different and varies based on their unique situation. I'm hoping that by sharing some things I've learned in my professional journey, you'll come away with a little more knowledge around how auto insurance works and some considerations for when you go to buy auto insurance. Hopefully you'll feel a little bit more equipped. First up, we're going to talk about liability insurance. So there's actually two different types of liability. The first is called bodily injury and the second is called property damage. So in general, liability coverage is for when you cause an accident and you are financially responsible for damage to another person's property, or if you injure them and you would be, responsible or liable to them for paying their medical expenses. This is the coverage that is typically required in every single state. In fact, the amount of coverage that you're required to hold for liability actually varies based on the state that you live and drive in. So to help you out, I'm actually going to include a link below in the comments to a website where you can look up what the financial responsibility minimum limits are for your particular state. But let's pivot into what would actually be recommended to select for this coverage. So first, let's talk about what are the different limits that exist. There's actually going to be 3 different limits when you have liability coverage. The first is going to be on a per person basis for bodily injury. The second is going to be on a per occurrence basis for, again, bodily injury. And then the third is going to be a limit for your property damage liability. Now, in talking to my dad about what he typically recommends to his clients, he usually suggests picking a fairly high limit of liability, usually $250, $500, $250, which again means you get $250,000 of coverage for bodily injury on a per person basis, $500,000 of coverage for a per occurrence or on an accident basis, and then $250,000 of coverage for property damage. And that could be to another individual's car or to their fence or any sort of property that you may damage of someone else's. And usually the price differential between the minimum limits that are offered and the higher limit that you could be selecting isn't that severe. Usually it's generally encouraged to purchase the higher liability because you certainly don't want to get into a situation where you cause an accident and then you're stuck with legal and medical expenses that you can't pay because you didn't have enough insurance to cover it. Another good reason to not pick the minimum limits is actually related to another coverage that we're going to talk about later called uninsured or underinsured motorists. And essentially, if you pick a low limit for your liability coverage, you're not going to be able to pick a higher limit for your uninsured and underinsured coverage later on. So that's something to keep in mind as well, and we'll get into more of the specifics of what that covers in just a second. Okay, so let's switch gears to our next 2 coverages called comprehensive and collision. Now, these are really important because what we've talked about so far in the liability coverage is if you get into an accident, you are only covered for damage to the other individual or their property. If your car is damaged too, you're out of luck. So to cover your own vehicle, you need to purchase comprehensive and collision coverage. Collision is going to cover damage to your vehicle in any instance where you collide into something. Comprehensive is sort of considered the catch-all for everything else that's non-collision related. So an example would be a tree branch falling on your car, or somebody breaking in and stealing your car, or vandalizing it, or a hurricane coming in and flooding your vehicle. So all of those type of things would be covered under comprehensive. And then again, if you run into something, your physical damage for your vehicle would be covered under collision. Now, typically, if you have a loan on your car, your lien holder will likely require you to purchase these two coverages. And when you have both liability and then comp and collision all together, that is what is typically referred to as having full coverage. For comp and collision, instead of selecting a limit, you're actually going to be picking a deductible. And a deductible is just the amount that you are responsible for paying before the insurance coverage kicks in. So a couple of things to consider. The higher deductible you pick, the lower your premium is going to be, either on a semi-annual or annual basis. Additionally, you have to think about how much money do you have set aside in either an emergency fund or in savings that you could pay out if an accident occurs. So picking the deductible for common collision is going to be a combination of considering, how much money do you have on hand that you would be comfortable, paying out if something bad happened, and how much do you want to save in your premium, and picking something that works best for your lifestyle. Next up, we're going to talk about personal injury protection and MedPay. So these coverages are similar to each other, but they typically vary, or which one is offered varies based on the state as well. Now, personal injury protection is going to typically cover a multitude of things. First, it would cover medical payments. Then it typically also covers lost wages, potentially funeral expenses, and possibly some other things too. Whereas MedPay is a little bit more limited, and it's really only going to be primarily covering those medical expenses that are incurred. Now, these are interesting coverages because they're considered no fault. So they will cover those types of expenses regardless of whose fault it is. Sometimes my dad has shared that he's heard the argument that, why would you purchase medical payments if you have health coverage? I think it's a valid question because it could seem as though those are covering the same things, right? Well, one benefit of purchasing medical payments for your auto insurance is that it would potentially cover any deductible or co-insurance that you have through your health insurance. So it sort of supplements or fills in the holes of maybe coverage gaps that you might have. So certainly not necessary, but it could be a really nice thing to have if you do get into an accident, and even if you do have health insurance, and it can cover your deductible and some expenses that you don't then have to pay out of pocket. All right, next we're going to circle back to those uninsured and underinsured coverages that I mentioned earlier. So what are these, and do you actually need them? Well, if you get into an accident and that somebody else causes, and either they don't have insurance or they don't have enough to cover your medical expenses or the damage to your vehicle, again, you could be kind of out of luck. Unfortunately, there are some people out there that drive illegally without insurance or don't purchase adequate limits, to where it really would be a good idea to consider purchasing uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage. And generally speaking, these are pretty inexpensive, so it really doesn't hurt too much to add them on there. Now, here's the kicker. Going back to the bodily injury and property damage liability coverages that we talked about earlier, you actually can't typically purchase a higher uninsured and underinsured coverage than what you've already selected on your own liability limits. So in other words, you don't want to limit the amount that you would be covered if somebody hurts you or damages your property. So you might want to consider purchasing those higher liability limits so that you can purchase the higher underinsured and uninsured motorists as well. So I'm going to wrap up by covering two additional coverages that are maybe a little less well known. The first is rental coverage. So if you get into an accident and your car's in the shop and you don't have a way to get around or a way to get to work, insurance companies will offer rental coverage, rental reimbursement coverage, which just means that if you rent a car or if you spend money on Uber or Lyft, you could be reimbursed for those expenses. Additionally, there is often roadside assistance that can be offered, and it's probably what it sounds like. If your car breaks down on the side of the road and you need to call a company to come tow your car or get you moving again, any expenses that are incurred from that could also be covered and purchased from an insurance company. So when you consider these two coverages as well, it kind of comes back to the fundamental question of, how much money do you have saved and on hand that you would be comfortable paying out if one of those situations came up. Typically, again, these are going to be less expensive coverages, at least compared to the liability and the comp and collision that we talked about earlier. But if you do have adequate funds on hand and don't have any concerns with paying for a rental car while your car's in the shop, or if you have an extra vehicle in your household and there's really no risk that you would need to do that, then maybe you don't need to purchase rental coverage. So again, it really just completely depends on your unique personal situation. Hopefully this helps make auto insurance a little less confusing for you, but I still would highly encourage talking to an insurance agent just to make sure that you get the coverage that best fits your personal needs. If you liked this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions at all, please put them down in the comments. I would love to answer them and connect with you all. If you want to learn more about insurance or what an actuary is, make sure to check out my website, inspiringactuaries.com, or you can find me on Instagram at inspiring_actuaries. Thanks so much for watching.